Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to combine all of your rasters into a single data frame, and each column in the data frame will represent the data from one raster. So I already have a folder with all of my rasters. They all end with TIFF and they all have the same projection. If they don't have the same projection, this will not work, so make sure that they all have matching resolutions, coordinate reference systems. They should all be exactly the same. The only thing that would differ is the actual variable. So to get started, we need to import the Terra library. This is a library for dealing with raster data. The next thing we need to do is create a variable for the folder where our data is saved. I'm going to call my variable rast folder. And that's where my data is saved. Next, I want to go through this folder and make a list of all of my rasters. The problem is I also have an R script here, and I don't want this included in my list of file names because it's not a raster. So we have to make sure R only grabs files that end with a TIFF. I'm going to call my variable rast files, and I'm going to use the list files function to make a list of all of my rasters. In this function, we have to specify which folder we want to look at, which for us is a rast folder. We need to specify the pattern of the file that we can use to identify the type of file. We know that we only want to look at files that end with TIFF, so that's what we're going to specify. If you're curious about why we have a backslash and a $sign, we're telling the function that we only want files that end with TIFF. I don't want files that begin with TIFF because it may not be a raster. It has to end with .tiff, and that's how we know it's a raster. And finally, I'm going to set full names equal to true because I want the full file path. I don't want a relative path. So let's run that and take a look. Okay, so you can see it looked through my folder and it grabbed the names of all the files that end with TIFF. The next thing we want to do is grab the first raster and turn it into a raster, because right now it's just a file name. We don't actually have it imported as a raster. So let's use the rast function from the Terra library and create a raster. This string here, or this function, we're basically saying that we want the first element of the rast files variable. If we just run that in the console, rast.files. You can see that we're grabbing the first one, the first element here. So that's what we want. Okay, let's take a look at first rast. You can see that it's now been converted. We now have imported the first raster in the data set. We can even plot it if we want. There you go, there's our raster. So now what we're going to do, now that we have one file imported, is turn that into a data frame and call it our main data frame. So I'm going to call it main df, and we're going to use a function called asDataFrame. We're going to turn the raster into a data frame by referencing the raster, first rast. I want to keep the x and y values. So we're going to do x, y equals true, because otherwise it will keep the variable values, but it won't include coordinates. And I want the x and y coordinates, and we're going to use those to combine all the rasters. So it's important to have x, y equals true. And I don't want to remove NA values. So I'm going to set na.rm, which stands for NA remove, to false. Let's run that. And let's take a look at the first 6 rows of this variable. There you go. So you have the x values, y values, and the raster values. Okay, so how do we add all of the other rasters that we have in here? Because we have a bunch of rasters, I want them all in one data frame. We are going to create a loop. So it's going to be a for loop, and we're going to use something called, we're going to use the tail function. If you've never used the tail function before, it's really helpful. And we're going to basically loop through every single raster except the first one. We already have the first one in a data frame. We don't need to loop through it again. So how do you loop through every one except this one? To do that, you use tail. And basically you use tail and you say, give me the last couple rasters, ignore the first one. So let's run that. And you can see here, we're looping through, we have a list of all the files except the first one. So this is what we're going to loop through. Okay, so let's create our for loop. We know that for any for loop, we need a for statement, we need brackets, and I'm going to say for r in tail ras files. And I'll show you what that looks like, print r. So here's our for loop. We're going to loop through, again, these files, and each file name is going to be represented by the letter r. If we print r, if we actually go through the for loop, you can see it's printing out each raster. Okay, so next we want to convert each r, so each raster, into a raster using, again, rast. So let's do that. I'm going to call it temp rast, and I'm going to convert that into a raster. Next, we want to convert that raster into a data frame. So we're kind of just copying what we've done here. I called mine temp df, temp data frame. And again, we're just copying everything that we've done here. So we want to convert our temp raster, so temp rast. We want to keep our x and y values, and we don't want to remove NA values. If you want to remove them, you can. I just prefer not to. Okay, then we want to add this data frame to our main data frame. And we're going to do that by using the merge function. So we're going to reference the main data frame and we're going to add to it. So we're going to merge, and the merge function, you know, it merges 2 data frames. It's nothing complicated. We're going to merge the main data frame with our temporary data frame. And we're going to use the x and y values because all of our rasters should match perfectly, and that means that they should have the same x and y values. And the way you do that is by using by. So you use by and you input a vector of column names to merge by. So we're going to use the x column and the y column. And the function will reference these values to combine the data. So let's do that. It's a vector of strings. There we go. So we're going to run that. I'm also going to print temp rast. So it'll print the file name, and it's also going to print the raster. And if you look in the console, I'll clear this out for now. If you look in the console, it'll print out the raster as we're looping through it. Okay, so we've looped through all of the rasters. So let's take a look at our main data frame, and we're going to use the head function. And there you have it. We have a single data frame with all of our rasters, Each column represents a raster. And if we take a look at the entire data frame, we've got a lot of data here, thousands and thousands of rows. So if we want to save this to a CSV, it's really quite simple. It's write CSV, we name the data frame, and then we reference the data frame, and then we just give it a name. I'm going to call it combined CSV. So it'll save the CSV in wherever you have your working directory set. I'm going to save mine to where my rasters are saved, which is here. So I'm going to set the working directory to my desktop sample data. And you can see now the working directory has been set to where my raster data is saved. I just found it manually. We can save combined CSV. Okay, and if we take a look at the folder now, there it is. So it's quite large, it's 628 megabytes, so I'm not going to open it, it'll crash my computer. But again, we can view it here, head main df, and when you pull it open into Excel, you'll see all of these columns and you'll see the coordinate values as well. So that's how you combine all of your rasters into a single CSV. Thanks for watching.